Salud and greetings from Bucharest. This is Gara de Nord. Just bought my train ticket to leave Bucharest. Been here for 3 weeks. It is day 22 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine when I am filming this. Just for reference, if it takes us a day or two to get it up onto the channel. Now, today's video, I want to address two points. First point is, obviously title of the video, the West is being cynical in Ukraine. And why do I say cynical? You've heard a lot about no-fly zones, close the sky. The Ukrainian government has been pleading for this for basically the last 3 weeks since the new invasion started. And so far, NATO leaders, whether it happens to the US or UK or other European leaders in the alliance, have ruled that out because they say that it's a risk of escalation with Russia to enforce the no-fly zone or to get involved militarily or send boots on the ground. Then they would risk direct confrontation with Russian troops, and that could escalate up to a nuclear war. So for the moment, they're just going to arm Ukraine increasingly to the teeth, as Ukraine has lost 22 days already in this war, which wasn't the expectation that I saw from almost any analyst, whether they were pro-Western or pro-Ukrainian or pro-Russian before the war. So they're arming Ukraine. So effectively what they're doing is fighting by proxy as opposed to sending their own troops, because that carries risk of escalatory spiral. And they'd also have to justify to their own populations why their soldiers are dying in Ukraine and what strategic interest is there for the West. So the easier option, and maybe the more cynical option, is to just supply arms to Ukraine, let them do the fighting instead. Now, a lot of people have sent me a series of lectures by John Mearsheimer, who is an offensive neo-realist, and he has a series of lectures that have been circulated widely, especially by those who are apologetic to Russia's position and saying that it's all the West's fault. Apparently Russia has no agency, because the quickest way to end this war is for Russia to get out of Ukraine. Then there'd be no war. It's really that simple. But he did make an interesting point in his lectures that I might review in a future video, that a very good cynical strategy by the West would be to lure or to bait Russia into attacking Ukraine, because there they would get bogged down and weaken themselves and actually not be such a big strategic threat to NATO, to the countries that are already in NATO. And that's actually what he said he would, I think, kind of recommend almost if he were to advise the West about a strategy. So that is super cynical if you look at it from that point of view. And on day 22, Russia has still only seized or in control of some parts of the south of Ukraine that have, in terms of being a big population center, which is basically Kherson, and the water supply from Novokakhovka that goes down to Crimea, and some nuclear power plants, is rather disconcerting. But it's day 22, and they don't control Kharkiv, they still don't control Mariupol, Chernihiv, Kiev, obviously, Sumy. So they are, at this point, in an impasse. The British Ministry of Defense this morning has said that they've stalled in terms of their military advance. So that is looking increasingly like it might turn into a quagmire for Russia, which would be the very cynical point of view of a strategy that, a successful cynical strategy by the West. I get a lot of messages from similar people. Some of them claim to be in favor of peace, and they blame Zelensky because he just doesn't give in to Russia's demands. They say, they had those demands beforehand that Russia wanted, basically a diktat, and it's all his fault because he doesn't want to agree to them, and he's risking that Ukraine turns into Afghanistan, in effect, because everything will get destroyed, because the Russians will just destroy everything. Now, it's true that in Afghanistan, the West also fought by proxy. They armed the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union lost about 15,000 troops over 10 years, and it's considered one of the contributing factors to the implosion of the Soviet Union from 1989 to 1991 when it dissolved. And yeah, that's definitely a possibility that Russia just keeps blowing up. So we've seen them wreck so many of the cities that are actually ironically Russian speaking, who they claim to be protecting with this invasion, like Mariupol. A lot of it is wrecked. Kharkiv, the center where I used to go with my clients, they blew up so much of the center, so many of the bars, cafes, restaurants, and I can see all the footage on Telegram. I mean, I don't see anything military there why they're doing that, other than the fact they're just trying to turn it into rubble and punish the people there in the center of Kharkiv, which is a city they still haven't taken as well. So that is a risk for sure, that if the Ukrainians don't win, or there is no peace agreement, truce, and the Russian forces leave, then they're going to keep fighting and just wreck the place. And that would be terrible. Again, the cynical strategy might be from the West, then Russia's just going to weaken itself and actually not be a big threat to the rest of Europe, because in effect, Ukraine is defending Europe from that point of view. And Putin made it very clear in his speech, declaration of war speech before this invasion, that he doesn't consider Ukraine's entitled to independence, its borders are legitimate. So, I mean, once you open Pandora's box and you start in that mindset, then why are you going to stop? You're just going to look at all the other places where the Russian Empire was, and logically you're just going to keep going through Moldova and the other countries. I have some other videos about where Russia will invade next if they are successful in Ukraine. So if Zelensky the Ukrainian president, were to agree to Russia's terms now, the ones that they have been offering in the last couple of days in these negotiations, like demilitarization of Ukraine, they give up joining NATO or the European Union. They recognize Crimea has been part of Russia, so rewarding previous invasions and aggression that's illegal under international law, that they then recognize the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk. Think about it. This war has been a fiasco for Russia. They've lost, there are a lot of different estimates. The Ukrainians claiming almost 15,000 soldiers, probably an exaggeration. But the Americans are saying 7,000, and the Brits are somewhere in between. And the Russians basically don't want to publish it. So that could be the low ball, about half of the losses that they got in Afghanistan in 10 years. It's only 3 weeks. So imagine if, and they've only taken Kherson so far, captured. Now that can change, I know, on the battlefield going forward. I'm not a military expert. I'm just seeing what I can see online. But imagine if you reward Putin in this situation where it's basically a fiasco militarily, and you sign a peace paper with him, and you give in to those rewards, those demands. What do you think he's going to do next? You think he's going to honor it? Already before this war, there are plenty of agreements in place, like the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, about Ukraine's sovereignty, and there was never a debate about, there was never a territorial dispute beforehand between Russia and Ukraine about the borders or about Crimea. It's simply he doesn't respect any of the agreements already, and he doesn't respect international law. Made it very clear he doesn't think that Ukraine is entitled to independence. Why would you believe that he's going to respect some sort of peace agreement? It's more likely he's just going to learn the mistakes from this military campaign, rearm, and either it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years down the road, he's simply going to come back and try and take Ukraine again and the countries afterwards that he can get to if he stopped now, or if they make an agreement now. So I think signing a piece of paper with a leader that obviously doesn't respect any of the previous agreements is a bit like Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich in 1938, having signed an agreement with Hitler, the Munich Agreement. Peace in our time, he said, and he waved this infamous piece of white paper. It was basically like a white flag of surrender. And yeah, they just invaded Poland. Obviously, the Second World War came along. So Churchill has a nice quip about appeasement. Appeasement is like feeding a crocodile and hoping to be eaten last. And so that's the argument in favor of not surrendering or agreeing to Russia's terms at the moment. We're on day 22 when I'm filming this of the war. But of course, the flip side is that you risk that the war goes on for a long time, or Russia just wrecks the entire place. That we've got, I'm not saying millions of people are going to be died, but definitely millions of people have been affected. We got over, I think it's almost 3 million refugees already, where Ukrainians have left to go to other countries. Probably the death toll, everything combined, it's probably in the tens of thousands, hopefully low in the tens of thousands, well over 10,000, I guess we could guess already. And it looks like being the biggest war in Europe, maybe exceeding the Balkans war pretty soon. Now, we're not at that point yet, thankfully. And that's the risk you take, that there's just going to be more bloodshed, destruction in Ukraine, if you don't concede. And you know, if you look back in the Second World War, you had the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland, where they didn't agree to the Soviet Union's diktat beforehand. Actually, Romania here, they did. They gave them the territory. And Finland fought and lost, but they basically it was a Pyrrhic victory for the Soviet Union. And then obviously the Second World War went on. And both Romania and Finland grabbed territory of the Soviet Union before they were beaten again. So it's a little bit hard to foresee which is going to be the best strategy at the end of the day. But back to the original point of the video, is the West cynical? Pretty much so. They're letting the Ukrainians do the fighting instead of doing it directly themselves, by and large, at least officially. And yeah, that's just the way it is. And that's unfortunate for Ukraine and for Ukrainians that they're not in NATO already, and then, or that Russia decided not to invade them, and we got this tragic situation. Anyways, that's my video. I'm gonna go back inside and get ready to leave, go to a new city. So see you in the next video. La rivedere. Do побачення. До свидання. Слава Україні.
SAR Experience.